I found the papers 3 days after my 79th birthday, hidden under the mattress they had bought for me, in the room they called Mom's room, in front of guests, and the storage problem, when they thought I was asleep. My name is Eleanor. And this is the story of how my own son tried to steal my life, and how an old woman he thought was too weak, too tired, and too foreign to this country fought back and took everything from him instead. I want you to understand something before I go further. I was not a woman who trusted easily. I raised my son alone after his father died, worked 2 jobs, skipped meals so he could eat, and never once complained. When he called me from America and said, "Mom, come live with us, let us take care of you now," I cried on the phone like a girl. I thought God had finally repaid me for 30 years of loneliness. I was wrong. God was not repaying me. He was warning me. I just didn't listen yet. The first 6 months were beautiful, or at least, they looked beautiful. My son David picked me up from the airport with flowers. His wife Melissa hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe, and she cried real tears, the kind you cannot fake, or so I believed back then. My grandchildren, Sophie and Ethan, fought over who would sit next to me in the car. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the reward for surviving everything alone. This is my family. I gave them everything I had left. Not because they asked directly. No, they were smarter than that, but because love makes you offer things nobody demands. I sold my house back home, the one my late husband and I built brick by brick with our own hands, the one where I raised David through fevers and heartbreaks and every scraped knee of his childhood. I sold it for $230,000. I wired every cent into a joint account David set up for me. For safety, he said. Banks in a new country are confusing, Mom. Let me handle it until you're settled. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. My blood. The boy I once carried on my hip through a war zone to keep him alive. The cracks started small. So small that if I told you about them individually, you would think I was imagining things, being a paranoid old woman with nothing better to do. But grief has a smell before it becomes grief. Betrayal has a sound before it becomes betrayal. And I started hearing that sound in my own house. It was in the way Melissa's smile would freeze half a second too long when I walked into a room mid-conversation. It was in the way David stopped meeting my eyes when I asked simple questions like, "How is the account doing? Should I check the balance?" It was in the way my 16-year-old granddaughter Sophie once looked at me with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite guilt, but sat somewhere painful in between. One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. Old age does that to you. Sleep becomes a stranger who visits less and less, and I heard voices from the kitchen downstairs. I almost went back to sleep. Almost. But something pulled me to the staircase instead, the way something always pulls you toward the truth you are not ready for. "She's got to sign it eventually," Melissa was saying. "The retirement community forms need her signature, not ours. If she doesn't sign this month, we lose the deposit." "She'll sign it," David said. "She trusts me. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her." Retirement community. I had never asked for a retirement community. Nobody had ever mentioned one to me. Not once. Not in 6 months of Sunday dinners and grandchildren's hugs and David calling me the strongest woman I know every single holiday when relatives visited. I stood on those stairs in the dark, in my nightgown, my bare feet cold against the wood, and I felt something inside me that I had not felt since my husband's funeral. Not sadness. Something colder. Something with edges. I went back to bed. I did not confront them that night. And this decision to stay silent, to watch, to wait, this was the first move of the war I did not yet know I was fighting. The next morning, I smiled at breakfast. I asked Ethan about his soccer game. I complimented Melissa's pancakes, even though they were dry, because that is what you do when you are gathering evidence instead of gathering trust. I had learned something in those 30 years alone raising David. You do not scream at a wound. You clean it first. Quietly. Then you decide what to cut away. I started paying attention the way I used to pay attention to unpaid bills stacking up when David was small, back when one missed payment meant the difference between electricity and darkness. I noticed the mail that arrived and disappeared before I could read it. I noticed David's new watch, the one that cost more than 3 months of my old pension. I noticed Melissa's new car in the driveway, sleek and silver, the kind of car that whispers, "Somebody else paid for this." $230,000. My house. My husband's sweat. My son's childhood. All of it, sitting in an account with my name on it that I was not allowed to see. I asked David directly one Sunday, gently, the way you approach a wild animal you are not sure will bite. "Beta, can you show me the bank statement? I just want to understand where things are." He laughed. He actually laughed, and patted my hand like I was a child asking about Santa Claus. "Mom, don't worry about numbers. That's what I'm here for. You focus on resting. You've worked your whole life. Let me carry this weight now. Let me carry this weight." As if my money had become his weight to carry, instead of my life to protect. That night I cried for the first time since arriving in America. Not loud sobs. I have never been a loud crier, but the quiet kind, the kind that leaks out of you while you stare at a ceiling in the dark, doing math in your head. $230,000. My name on the account. My signature required for a retirement community I never asked to enter. I understood then what was happening. They did not bring me to America to take care of me. They brought me here to process me. Like a form. Like paperwork. Sell the house, transfer the money, wait for Mom to sign away her independence, place her somewhere quiet and far away, and keep everything that remained. I want to tell you something about grief and rage. They are cousins, but rage is the useful one. Grief makes you smaller. Rage, if you aim it correctly, makes you dangerous. I decided that night that I would not scream. I would not cry in front of them. I would not give Melissa the satisfaction of seeing an old foreign woman fall apart in her spotless kitchen. Instead, I would become exactly what they thought I already was. Quiet, slow, harmless, confused about American paperwork, sweet old grandma who needed everything explained to her twice. They had no idea that the woman who raised a son alone through 2 decades of poverty, who negotiated with landlords in a language that wasn't even her first language, who once talked a hospital administrator into free surgery for her sick child through sheer will and strategy. That woman does not become harmless just because her hair turns white. The next part of my plan required patience. And patience was the only thing America had not been able to take from me. I started small. I asked Sophie, my granddaughter, to teach me how to use a smartphone properly, so I don't feel so useless. I told her, batting my eyes like a woman twice as fragile as I really was. Sophie, sweet Sophie, 16 and still soft enough to feel guilty about things her parents did, taught me everything. How to take photos. How to save documents. How to use cloud storage. How to screenshot a text message and keep it forever, invisible, untouchable, safe. She had no idea what she was really teaching me. I began photographing every piece of mail that touched the counter before David could sweep it away. I photographed the edges of documents left open on the kitchen table when Melissa ran out for groceries. I photographed a bank letter I found in the recycling bin, half torn, but readable enough, showing a withdrawal of $40,000 from my account into a business venture David had started calling an investment opportunity at every family dinner, always changing the subject the moment I asked what kind of investment. $40,000, gone, without my knowledge, without my consent, without so much as a conversation. I found out later, much later, through Sophie, who by then trusted me more than she trusted her own parents, that the investment was a failing restaurant David had put money into with his college friend, a restaurant that closed within 4 months, taking my $40,000 down with it like a stone into water. That was the moment the last soft part of me hardened completely. Because I could forgive being lied to. I could almost forgive being managed like an inconvenient asset. But I could not forgive watching my husband's life savings, my own decades of sacrifice, burned on a gambling table disguised as a business plan, while I was told to not worry about numbers. Grief has stages, they say. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Betrayal has its own stages too, ones nobody writes books about. First, disbelief. Surely there is an explanation, Surely my son is not capable of this. Then the second stage, the dangerous one, where you start rewriting the last 6 months in your head, replaying every dinner, every hug, every "I love you, Mom" whispered at the door, searching for the exact moment the mask slipped, searching for proof that some part of it, at least, was real. I never found that proof. And that absence hurt worse than the money ever could. There was a night, somewhere in that second month of quiet investigation, when I sat alone in my room with the door locked, staring at a photograph of my late husband on the nightstand, and I asked him, out loud, like a foolish old woman talking to a picture frame, did I raise him wrong? Did I fail him somewhere? And this is the result. The photograph did not answer, of course. But somewhere in the silence that followed, I found my own answer, and it was not the one Melissa or David would have wanted me to find. I did not fail David. David failed himself, and he was choosing every single day to keep failing, one signature at a time, one transfer at a time, one carefully rehearsed smile at a time. Understanding that difference, the difference between a mother's failure and a grown man's choice, was what finally let me stop grieving and start planning. I began visiting the local senior center twice a week, officially for socializing, which David encouraged because it kept me occupied and out of the house during the day. Unofficially, I was building an army. There was Margaret, a retired paralegal with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, who taught me, over many cups of weak coffee, exactly what power of attorney meant, and more importantly, what it meant when someone had not actually given valid power of attorney but was acting like they had. There was Mr. Alvarez, a retired accountant, who explained joint bank accounts to me in simple words, who explained the difference between what David could legally touch and what he could not, no matter how many documents he waved in front of a tired, trusting old woman. I learned that my name being first on that account meant something. I learned that David needed my actual signature, not implied consent, not a nod at dinner, not "Mom trusts me," for the largest transactions. I learned that the retirement community deposit could not be finalized without my written approval. I learned that I still, despite everything, held more power than they had counted on. They thought they were dealing with an old woman who didn't understand American systems. They forgot that survival makes you fluent in systems, in any country, in any language. I began stalling the retirement community paperwork with the practiced innocence of a woman raised in a culture where elders are rarely questioned. "I don't understand this word," I would say, pointing at a form. "Can you explain it again? My eyes are tired today." David's patience thinned with every delay, and thinning patience makes people careless. Careless people leave their laptops open. Careless people leave passwords written on sticky notes, just for a few days. Careless people forget that grandmothers notice everything, especially the things they are trained their whole lives to notice. Small movements, small silences, the particular tension in a room right before someone lies to your face. I found the second account by accident, or maybe by fate, while pretending to look for a recipe on David's laptop, which he had left open on the kitchen counter while showering. A second account. One I was never told existed. $60,000 sitting quietly, transferred there in increments small enough not to raise obvious alarms if anyone had been checking. Which of course, no one was, because everyone assumed the confused old woman upstairs wasn't capable of checking. I photographed the screen with the phone my own granddaughter had taught me to use. By now, 4 months had passed since that night on the staircase. I had transformed from a woman drowning in betrayal into something far more dangerous, a woman documenting it, piece by piece, with the same discipline I once used to stretch a single paycheck across 30 days. I want to be honest with you about something. Revenge does not feel like triumph while you are building it. It feels lonely. It feels like carrying a secret so heavy it presses against your ribs every time you sit at that dinner table and pass the rice to the son who is stealing from you, and smile, and ask about his day, and listen to him complain about his job while $60,000 of your husband's memory sits hidden in an account he thinks you will never find. But loneliness, I have learned, is a small price for justice, especially when you have already survived far worse loneliness for far less reason. The final piece I needed was legal, not emotional. Margaret from the senior center connected me with a young lawyer named Rachel Kim, who specialized, almost as if the universe had planned it, in elder financial abuse. I remember sitting in her small office, spreading photographs and screenshots across her desk like a woman finally putting down a suitcase she had carried across an ocean. Rachel's face changed as she went through them. She looked at me with something between horror and respect. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said, "do you understand what your son has done here? This isn't just betrayal. Depending on how these transfers were structured, some of this could be considered financial exploitation of an elder. That's a crime in this state. A crime. My son, my David, whose fevers I once sat awake through for entire nights, whose first steps I clapped for like he had discovered fire, had committed a crime against me. I did not cry in that office. I had cried enough already, quietly, in the dark, on nights when the ceiling was the only witness. Instead, I asked Rachel one question. What are my options? She laid them out clearly. I could go to the police immediately, which would likely destroy the family completely and publicly, possibly result in David facing charges. I could pursue a civil case to recover the money, which would take longer but keep things quieter, at least at first. Or, and this was the option that made something in my chest finally settle, finally feel like control instead of chaos, I could confront them directly, with everything I now had, and give them the chance to make it right before I decided how far to take it. I chose the third option. Not because I am merciful, because I wanted them to see my face when they realized I had one. I planned it the way David had once planned science fair projects with my help decades ago. Meticulously, with backup materials, with a clear beginning, middle, and end. I asked Rachel to prepare formal documents outlining the financial exploitation, ready to file within 24 hours if needed. I asked Margaret to be present at the senior center that day, just in case, as emotional backup dressed up as a coincidental visit. And I asked Sophie, sweet, guilty 16-year-old Sophie, to simply be honest with me if I asked her a direct question in front of her parents. I did not tell her what was coming. I only asked for her honesty, which, thankfully, she still possessed in full. I chose a Sunday. Dinner, the same table where they had smiled at me for 6 months while draining me slowly like water from a cracked glass. Melissa had made her usual dry pancakes for breakfast that morning. By evening, she was serving roast chicken, oblivious that this particular dinner would be the last one where she held any power in this house. I waited until dessert. I always believed the sweetest moments should carry the sharpest truths. David, I said, my voice calm, calmer than I had felt in 6 months. I want to talk about the accounts. I watched his fork pause halfway to his mouth. I watched Melissa's eyes flicker toward him. Quick, involuntary, guilty. What accounts, Mom? He said, trying so hard to sound casual that his voice cracked slightly on the last word. I placed my phone on the table, screen up, the photograph of the second account glowing between us like evidence in a courtroom, because in a way, it was exactly that. This one, I said. The one with $60,000 in it. The one I was never told about. And the $40,000 from my original account, the one you called an investment, that disappeared into a restaurant that closed 4 months later. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever experienced in my entire life. Ethan, only 12, looked between his parents with confusion. Sophie stared down at her plate, her guilt written plainly across her young face, because she alone in that room had known something was wrong for a while and had said nothing, and now she was watching the consequences of everyone's silence arrive all at once. Mom, I can explain, David started, but I raised my hand. The same hand that once slapped away bullies threatening him on a schoolyard decades ago, the same hand that had signed away a house to give him this new life. And he stopped talking immediately, the way children stop talking when a mother's silence carries more authority than any scream ever could. I have a lawyer, I said simply. I have documentation of every transaction. I have proof that you attempted to move me into a retirement facility without my consent, using funds from an account I was legally entitled to monitor and control. I have proof of $40,000 lost in an unauthorized investment. I have proof of $60,000 hidden in an account with my name attached but my knowledge absent. Melissa's face had gone the color of the tablecloth. Eleanor, we can talk about this privately, we don't need to. We are talking about it right here, I said. At this table, in front of your children, because they deserve to understand exactly what kind of people raised them, and exactly what almost happened to their grandmother while they sat here eating dinner every night. David's hands were shaking now. The boy who once negotiated his way out of every difficult conversation with charm and confidence had nothing left to offer, because charm does not work on evidence. Melissa tried a different approach. She always did have a different approach than her husband. Where David crumbled, Melissa attacked. "You've been spying on us," she said, her voice sharp, defensive, already reaching for the narrative that would make me the villain of this story instead of them. "Going through our things, taking photos like some kind of investigator. Is this what you do all day while we're at work? Is this how you repay us for taking you in? Taking me in. As if I were a stray animal they had rescued out of pity, instead of a mother whose house money was funding half the furniture in that room." I looked at her for a long moment before I answered. Long enough that even Ethan, only 12, seemed to understand something important was happening in that silence. "You are right about one thing, Melissa," I said finally. "I have been watching. Very closely. It is a skill I learned a long time ago, in a country you have never had to survive in, where watching closely was sometimes the only thing standing between my family and disaster. You mistook my watching for weakness. That was your first mistake. Your second mistake was assuming that because I speak English carefully, I understand banking carelessly." She opened her mouth to respond and then closed it again, because there was truly nothing left to say to a woman holding photographic evidence of every dollar they had moved without her knowledge. Sophie, still staring at her plate, finally lifted her head. Her eyes were wet. "Grandma," she said quietly, "I didn't know it was this bad. I saw some of the papers once, in Dad's office, but I didn't understand what they meant. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry. You were a child put in an impossible position," I told her, and I meant it fully. "The adults in this room are the only ones who owe apologies tonight. I want the $60,000 returned to my account by Friday," I continued. "I want a full written accounting of the $40,000 lost, and I want it understood clearly in this house that I will never sign any retirement community paperwork ever, unless it is entirely my own decision, made with my own lawyer present." "And if I don't?" David asked, his voice smaller than I had ever heard it, smaller than when he was 7 years old and afraid of thunderstorms. I let the silence stretch just long enough for him to feel its full weight. "Then Rachel Kim files the report Monday morning," I said. "And you can explain to a judge why your elderly mother's life savings ended up in accounts she never approved." I want you to understand something about that moment. I did not feel joy. I did not feel the sweet victory that revenge promises in movies. I felt something quieter, something more permanent. The specific relief of a woman who had spent her entire life being underestimated finally watching the people who underestimated her realize their mistake in real time. David returned the $60,000 within 3 days, transferred with trembling hands, and an apology email so long and so desperate that I read it twice just to understand how a person can know exactly what they did wrong and still somehow act surprised when consequences arrive. The $40,000 from the failed restaurant he could not fully return. Money lost is money lost, no matter how many tears accompany the apology, but he agreed in writing, witnessed by Rachel, to repay it gradually from his own salary, not from any joint account, not from anything with my name attached to it ever again. I did not go to the police. Not because I forgave him. Forgiveness, I have learned, is a gift you give yourself, not a reward you hand to someone who has not earned it, but because Sophie and Ethan still needed a father, even a deeply flawed one, and I decided that breaking the family completely would only create a new kind of casualty, one too young and too innocent to deserve it. There is a version of this story where I burned it all down, where I let Rachel file that report Monday morning, where David's name appeared in a courthouse ledger, where Melissa's silver car got repossessed along with every illusion she had built her identity around. I thought about that version more than once, late at night, when the anger came back in waves I couldn't always control. Some nights, I wanted that version. I wanted him to feel, even for a single day, the particular terror of having no control over what happens to you next. The terror I had felt on that staircase at 2 a.m., the terror of realizing the people who were supposed to protect you were the ones you needed protection from. But rage, I reminded myself again and again, is only useful when it is aimed. Aimed correctly, it builds something. Aimed carelessly, it burns everything, including the parts you meant to save. And so I chose the aim that let 2 children keep a home, however imperfect, while still making absolutely certain their grandmother would never again be treated as an asset instead of a person. But something between David and me broke permanently that Sunday, and no amount of returned money could fully repair it. He still calls me Mom. He still hugs me at holidays. But there is a distance now, a careful, measured distance, the kind that exists between 2 people who both know exactly what the other is capable of. I moved out 6 months later, into a small apartment I chose myself, paid for entirely with my own recovered savings, close enough to visit my grandchildren but far enough that no one could ever again mistake my presence for permission to control my life. Sophie visits me every weekend now, and sometimes over tea, she apologizes quietly for the silence she kept during those months, and I tell her the same thing every time. That silence born from fear is forgivable, but silence chosen out of comfort is not, and she has never chosen comfort since. I think about that night on the staircase often, that 2 a.m. moment when I could have gone back to sleep, could have chosen the easier path of ignorance, could have let myself remain the sweet, harmless grandmother they wanted me to be. I think about how close I came to losing everything simply because I trusted the wrong assumption, that blood automatically means loyalty, that love automatically means safety. It doesn't. I learned that at 79 years old, in a country I had crossed an ocean to call home, at the hands of the one person I had sacrificed my entire life to protect. But I also learned something else, something I carry now like armor instead of wound. That being underestimated is not a weakness. It is camouflage. The world will tell you that old age means fragility, that trust means blindness, that love means silence. I am here to tell you that the quietest woman at your dinner table might be the one taking screenshots. The most harmless smile in the room might belong to the person building your downfall, patiently, legally, and completely. They thought I was too old to fight back. They thought I was too foreign, too trusting, too tired to notice what was happening right under my own roof. They were wrong. And somewhere, in a small apartment with a window that catches the morning sun, an old woman drinks her tea slowly every single day, and smiles, not because she has forgotten what happened, but because she remembers exactly how it ended, with her name back on every account that mattered, her dignity fully restored, and her family finally understanding that underestimating her was, and will always be, the single greatest mistake they ever made.